BBC Essex Travel.
Well, as we've been telling you in our news bulletins, Barrie Masters, the lead singer of the band Eddie and the Hot Rods, has died at the age of just 63. Best known for their 1977 hit Do Anything You Wanna Do. The band formed in 1975, Canvey Island. They were part of the pub rock scene, which featured Dr. Feelgood, Ian Dury's band Kilburn and the High Road. You remember them as well? Well, Eddie and the Hot Rods, their guitarist for 20 years, Richard Holgarth, has been telling me why Barrie Masters was so special.
I think probably because if you were to make some kind of composite of a rock and roller, someone with a voice that could strip paint, someone who had, a capacity for having a great time that was unmatched and just looked the part completely, wiry, athletic, used to be bounding around the stage, leaping off equipment. He was just the perfect frontman, really. He was a real character.
Did his death come as a shock to you, or has he been ill for some time? Or
well, one of the things that happened in the last 12 months was that we were scaling down touring activities with the band,
right.
because Barrie was suffering from ill health. It was nothing particularly serious. He was just generally getting tired. He had a bit of a lung problem, which is not great for a singer. So we'd been winding down stuff anyway, and so just recently he semi-retired. He'd come off to see how well he felt coming off the road, and was feeling a lot better. So yes, it has been a great surprise. Really, it was one of those things that with Barrie, as I say, hasn't been well, but was feeling a lot better, and we were hoping that Barrie would be around as a mate for a long time, even if he wasn't actually fronting the band at the time.
Because you've been a guitarist with Eddie and the Hot Rods for, 20 years?
Yes, and the whole band, as it's in its current lineup, has been together for that period of time, and some of them there for longer. So we've been touring together as a unit for the last couple of decades. You become very close that way. There's a lot of time spent together on the road, and a lot of great gigs that you do together, and you tend to bond and you become very close. So it's a great shock for all of us in the band.
Let's go back to the beginning, because the big hit, which I remember vividly, 1977, Do Anything You Want to Do. How did the band first start? Let's take it before you became involved, obviously, in the mid-70s. How did they start?
Well, as I understand it, and as ever with Barrie, one of the great things about Barrie was he was a terrific storyteller. So most of his stories have several different angles to them. But the one that most of us sort of settled on was they were just a bunch of lads. They were just a bunch of bored teenagers. They were 16 years old, and they picked instruments up, and they threw their favourite songs into a hat, and ended up forming Eddie and the Hot Rods. And before they knew what had happened, there was kind of pub. I think it was called, which is very peculiar English, I think, pub rock. It's you mention pub rock anywhere in America or on the continent, because obviously we did a fair bit of work there as well. They don't quite understand the concept, but in this country, people might remember that there was this pub rock scene, and which includes Dr. Feelgood and bands like that, and Brisley Schwartz, where there was this very close scene, and the Hot Rods fitted perfectly straight into there, even though they were so young, and that was it. They suddenly had a hit on their hands as well, with Do Anything You Want to Do, which came a little bit later. But prior to that, they bothered the charts a little bit with Teenage Depression and things like that, and so they were just a bunch of young lads who were bored and liked playing guitars.
Was it the Sex Pistols who trashed their equipment?
Yeah, again, that was when the 100 Club held. I think it was about 4,000 people, if you believe everyone that was there that night. But there was a contretemps, shall we say, between Barrie and John Lydon over some equipment that got damaged, and I think fists flew, but didn't necessarily make any contact.
What was he like to tour with? Because, for all of us in the audience, he's got to have been larger than life.
Yeah, he was. He was a perfect little. Well, not little because he's not a small baby. But he's always been very slender, so he always looked great. He was a very popular man, and he loved the rock and roll lifestyle. Barrie was always willing to sort of share a few tales with anybody in exchange for Southern Comfort and lime, and so cone lime, as he was just shouting from the stage. But he used to get dehydrated a lot, Barrie. So he was great. He was always great for an anecdote.
And what's going? Come on, tell me some of the tales, or the tales that you can tell me on the radio.
I'm not sure to go near any of them. I mean, there were various tales. There were various tales. It was not unusual for Barrie to be found, after a search in the morning in a different country.
A different country.
Yes, it has been known for him to end up, starting off at a gig in France and then finally being tracked down to somewhere in Belgium, while everybody's waiting to move on to the next gig. Stuff like that. In later years, obviously, as he slowed down like we all do, and was just much more for talking about these exploits than actually getting involved in them. But he, by all accounts, he lived a part, did Barrie.
He lived a life.
Great character.
He lived a life. If people say about you, you lived a life, then you haven't done too badly, have you? Really?
For me, it's just been great to see the outpouring of lovely comments that have come through today on social media and to my own phone and everything from people from all over the world, really, who have been touched by Barrie and his life in music. Let's not forget he was also a great singer, really great singer, fantastically powerful voice. And
because 1975 was an era when punk was it was growing, wasn't it? There was a lot of disco around at the time, there's a lot of other things around at the time, but punk was just in its infancy then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think in those days it was much more about an attitude than a genre. It was I think later on it got stylized slightly, to what most people might think of as punk. But I think it was much more in those days, as I say, an attitude. It was a state of mind. It was just getting on with like we were saying earlier about just young lads who wanted to make some music. They weren't virtuosos. They weren't anything. There was nothing special about it. But they made a great noise together, and they just played their favourite songs hard and fast. That's always been the thing with the Hot Rods. I think our little phrase, is just basically in your face, fast rock and roll music. And that kind of fitted the punk ethos quite well. So although the band never ended up, with spiky hair and safety pins, etc., they fitted quite nicely into the sort of punk ethos.
Going back earlier this year, of course, you had, Barrie was awarded a Pioneer Award at the end of March. You had the gig at the O2 Academy in Islington, a celebration of Eddie and the Hot Rods. How important were those things for Barrie? Yes, we did that. And that was a fantastic evening. All the original members, or surviving original members, unfortunately, Dave Higgs is no longer with us, who was a very important original member of the band, and but the rest of the surviving members of the band and lots of the members who have been in the band over the years all turned up for that. So that in itself was fantastic for Barrie. Everybody turned up to kind of celebrate, because by then the decision had been pretty much made that was going to be our final round of touring, and that Barrie would be coming off the road. There was a little tail end to that, in that we spent, which was also quite nice, in that we were on tour with Stiff Little Fingers for the first part of this year. So there was a nice opportunity there for Barrie to sort of round off his career with some cracking, decent sized gigs. But that one at Islington was always intended to be a kind of almost living tribute for him. I think a lot of people have to die before they get everybody turning out and saying what a great bloke they were. And Barrie was able to enjoy that before he did go. So I think he thoroughly enjoyed himself that night, as did everybody who was there. Richard, finally, when you think of this man, when you think of Barrie Masters, is there one image, a picture that comes into your mind? Is it one particular gig? Is it one particular image that comes into your mind?
I could say the position he normally adopted in the tour bus when we were travelling around in the van, which was usually sort of flat on his back catching flies. But it's probably fairer to say that, he had this, he used to wear these sort of like coloured rags around his wrists and everything like that, and would always be sort of directing the music in some way with his arms, almost conducting it, and I sort of quite often, I would just look across at him and he'd just be grinning away, thoroughly enjoying himself on stage. I just remember him like that, really. I've just been going through some pictures. And there were a lot like that, with him with a big smile on his face.
Oh, there was huge affection there, wasn't there? Richard Holgarth, who gigged with Eddie and the Hot Rods for 20 years, actually, talking about the lead singer of Eddie and the Hot Rods, Barrie Masters, who's died at the age of 63.